Welcome back to another episode of the Free Dive podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Billingslea, and today I have a very special guest for you, my brother, Kevin Billingslea. Thanks for being with us, Kevin.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
We wanted you to be on the podcast for several reasons. What you do is pretty cool, and you work in the creative field, so maybe you could start by telling everybody some of the things you do. I learned a lot of what I know how to do from audio because of you. Why don't you give everyone just a little bit of a background on where you work, what you do?
So I am a record producer, audio engineer. I work at a studio called the Halo Studio in Windham, Maine. Before that, I had a little home studio, and I was kind of quasi starting out. And then before that, I spent a little bit of time in New York learning under a buddy of mine. And I've been doing it since I was probably 15, recording friends' bands in high school, very poorly.
But you taught yourself.
Yeah, for the most part. I definitely had some help along the way from people who know more than I do, which is obviously a good thing. And this is probably aging myself a little bit, but in the beginning when I was first learning how to do it, there was kind of internet forums, but YouTube wasn't a thing yet. You kind of just figured stuff out by trial and error. The first things I ever recorded were those little crappy computer microphones that came with your old compact Presario things, and it would just be that microphone into Windows sound recorder, and then mixing was do it again, the guitar is too loud, move the amp back. And then slowly just trial and error, figuring stuff out along the way. So I've been doing it full-time professionally for 14 years now. 13, 14 years.
Yeah.
So long time, but...
And working primarily, what you said, with bands?
Yeah, occasionally... I get hit up all the time to do, voiceover stuff.
Okay.
But, I don't love doing it.
Yeah.
It's not creative for me. And there was a period of time where, when you're first starting out, you got to take every gig you can get.
Yes.
But I'm fortunate now that I can kind of be a little more picky and choosy with what I want to do. And voiceover stuff, I don't know, it feels too desk jobby for me. There's no creativity to it. And then you're dealing with publishers and, all the other red tape bureaucratic stuff. It's if I wanted a desk job, I'd get a desk job.
Right.
So I kind of just turn those down now.
Yeah.
But they do come up every now and then.
So that's a long time to be working in that field. And, you've learned from a lot of different people along the way. And there's so many different things in the creative process that we could ask you, I want to ask you. One of the things we've talked about through the years is, one of the things in the struggle of the creative process is when working with clients, your vision versus their vision, and how to kind of get in alignment with that, both with the final product, both with getting it done in a timely fashion and in the right budget. How have you found the right way to reconcile those things through the years? I'm sure it's taken time to kind of figure out how to do that, but how have you gotten there?
So, and these are lessons I learned the hard way and the painful way at times.
Think about how people want a good product for cheap money. We've talked about that before.
Yeah. And that's there's an old, I forget what the name of the chart is, but it's it's the three totems. You want it to be good, you want it to be free, you want it to be fast.
Right.
Any two of those is not impossible, but it's not going to yield good results. And all three is just don't even bother. So I think if I'm working backwards mentally, where I'm at now is what I've learned is that if I'm getting the sense from a band or an artist that comes through and I always ask for demos up front. I want to know what they're working with, like what their starting point is. And then, have a little bit of a back and forth on what they want to get out of it.
Okay.
And this doesn't happen too much these days, and I'll explain why in a minute. But if I'm getting the sense that, like, either what I see as the end result doesn't align with them and it's, like, too far off, or I just don't get it, I'll turn the project down.
Okay.
Because I would rather them find someone who understands what they're going for than take their money and wind up with a product that nobody's happy with, that is always like a compromise on.
Yeah. And you can generally tell that from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that just comes from years of doing it because, like I said earlier, like when you're starting out, you take every project that comes your way and you figure out, in those days, you figure out halfway through the project that, like, oh, we are not on the same page with this. And it never turns out good. Either you're going to be unhappy with it and, like, don't want to put your name on it, or they're not going to be happy with it, which is even worse.
Yeah.
The advantage that comes with doing it for a long time is bands that hit me up now know what my sound is. They know how I operate. So they're coming to me because they like what I do.
They already know what
they're going to get. They've heard other things I've done. They're like, cool, we want something like that. So that's the guy for that. Yeah. When you're starting out, you don't have that
backlog,
that brand for, whatever it is. So you're kind of just making it up as you go.
Right.
And that's a tough thing to navigate. And it's one of those things where the only way out is through. You just got to go through it a few times. But it's, dealing with a band or an artist or a client, whatever you want to call it, it's no different than a relationship, and it takes communication like every step of the way.
Yeah.
Don't assume anything. Like if you are unsure about something, have that dialogue with them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you might steer the project in a totally different direction what they want. So just keeping that open line of communication will get you through to at least a place where everybody's happy with it. And that's the other tough thing too, is I get so invested in the projects that I work on, I become almost kind of drill sergeant-y.
Yeah.
And I can sometimes lose sight of like what they want. Like I have my vision for it and I'm so tunnel visioned on it that it's taken me a long time to figure out, like, don't go too deep into that tunnel without being like, are you cool with the direction this is going in?
So that was one of my questions is how do you handle those creative differences because you're the professional and knows what will sound the best ultimately, but they're the client and have this idea of what they want. And so if they're asking for certain things or for changes that won't sound good or won't work, how do you deal with that?
I think it's just accruing enough knowledge to explain to them in not condescending terms of like why that won't necessarily work or why it might not work. A big thing there, I forget who said this. It's like another producer who said, any idea that somebody has is worth 7 minutes of trying it.
Okay.
Like if they have a weird idea, invest 7 minutes into it, and you'll know then and there if it's going to be fruitful or if it's a waste of time.
Okay.
And when I was younger and not as seasoned in like the intrapersonal side of things, I would just be like, no, that's stupid. That's not going to work. Mm-hmm. But that's not how a good relationship operates.
Right.
So you can explain to them, like, this is why I feel it won't work. I'm happy to try it, but these are the pitfalls I see in going down that road. Mm. So again, comes down to communication. That's the biggest thing. And the other thing too, and I think this is something that sets not entirely, but sets apart like the music side of things is, the client is the artist. They have their vision for things. And even if they have things that are weird, but they're like married to them.
Yeah.
Like you can't shoot down all the ideas. Mm-hmm. And it's always some level of compromise.
Right.
And depending on who the client is, it's a sliding scale of how much that is. You might be perfectly lock in step with their vision, or it might be a little far apart and you got to bend here and they'll bend here. I forget what we were talking about.
No, that is what we were talking about. So how have you found that working that way, like, has created like client loyalty, like clients coming back to you? Is that something that has worked well?
Yeah. Oh, big time. I think it's just a level of trust that they have. Because any new artist, client, whatever, however you want to term it, there's always that, like, they come to me because they like what I do, but they don't have that interpersonal relationship yet.
Yeah.
So when I'm offering up suggestions or like potentially shooting down some of their ideas, they're like not entirely used to that process yet. But the more they come back, the more they're like, oh yeah, we did this before and it didn't work because of this, so we trust you more. So it becomes smoother as you go. And they know that, like, at the end of the day, I want them to win. Like, I want the artists that I work with to have success. So, like, I'm not going to let them fail as far as, like, the product that I'm putting out. Like, what they do with it in terms of their career, I don't really have a stake in.
Right.
But in the product that they're releasing to the world, like, I'm not going to let them fail.
Right.
So I think, again, relationships, that's just trust that's built over doing it well the first time, treating them well, and then it turned, like, I have bands that I've been working with for 5 years, bands that I've been working with for 10 years, like, and also one of those things where, bands are individual people and sometimes bands break up and those guys go and form new bands. So I get, their new projects with guys that they don't know. And then it's very much like not spidering.
I can't think of the word either.
It grows. It does this.
It grows.
It does this.
It does this.
Yeah.
So you feel like you work a lot on, like, referrals? Like, how are you getting your work?
It's pretty much entirely word of mouth. Bands hear one of their friends' bands, like a different band, and they're like, hey, that sounds really good. Who'd you go to? And then that goes that way. Like, I've never put a dime of my own money into, like, ads or anything like that. And
because you've never needed to?
I've never needed to. And when I first started out, like, I think I recognize this, and I think a lot of people struggle with this, is I was doing a lot of bands for, like, free or pennies on the dollar when I was starting out, because I needed to get a catalog of work out there to show people.
Yeah.
Like, no amount of, like, clever advertising is going to entice people to come work with somebody that has no portfolio body of work to show.
Yeah.
So my investment was doing records for free or for very cheap for the first couple of years I was doing this. But then those bands have friends and they need stuff done. And it's a very slow burn doing it that way. But I think it yields a lot better.
So circling back to thinking about, talking about can't do it cheap, can't do it for cheap, can't do it fast, can't do it well. Thinking about how much you charge, how do you kind of make those decisions on what your time and your product is worth? Like, how have you figured that out through the years? Initially, you were doing it a lot for free, and now you've been doing this professionally for so many years. How do you figure out how to set your rates?
Very painfully. I think the biggest hurdle for me is when I moved out of my little basement studio where I had no overhead, and moving into a professional studio that I didn't own, and paying rent for every day that I was in there. Like, my costs doubled. Like, my rates doubled.
Yeah.
And I lost a lot of bands at that point. Like the first 6 months to a year that I was at the, professional studio I work at now, it was like slim pickings for a while because a lot of the bands I was working with before that were like younger, like self-funding bands who just wanted to record for cheap.
Yeah.
And I realized shortly after that like those bands who all they really cared about was a cheap record that they didn't have to pay for, it wasn't always super great to work with. Like they didn't have the work ethic. Like, there's an expectation, or not an expectation. There's an expression where today's miracle is tomorrow's expectation. Where like you get a band in, the drummer can't play in time, the guitar player can't play in tune, the singer can't, sing. And you use all these little tips and tricks to like try to get it to, a good level. And, you pull a rabbit out of the hat.
You're doing twice as much work.
I'm doing twice as much work for half the money. And then the next time they come around, they're less motivated to work hard because like you fixed it last time.
Right.
So it like I think the people who were so focused on being the cheapest one around, it's a race to the bottom.
That's exactly it.
And you don't ever want to be the guy that people come to work with because you're the most affordable.
I so agree.
That's not sustainable, like financially or mentally. So what I realized when I moved up in studios, that I basically just lost all the weight of bands that were like
not serious,
and and what I gained was bands who were serious, who worked hard, who like wanted to make a proper go at this.
They're investing this money for a reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what I always tell bands is it's like, if, let's say their goal is to get a booking agent or a manager or a label, and they hear the songs that they're putting out and they can tell that like, these were kind of cheaply done. Nobody is going to invest in you if you're not investing in yourself.
Yeah. That's a great point.
And that's a tough lesson to learn.
Yeah, that's a great point. With anything.
So, then that's like, if I'm thinking about my costs, my operating costs now, or just, what I charge, it's probably 5 or 6 times what it was when I started. But, and a lot of bands, can be spooked by that. Like I lose some albums, whatever, because they're so used to working with more affordable producers, studios, that's all they know, that they see a bigger number than that. And they're just like, no, we can't pay that, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But I've been very pleasantly surprised with the amount of bands who have come to me, said that, like, this is a bit of a sticker shock. And then at the end they go, I get it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And they're return clients all the time.
Yeah. And that makes you feel more like respected, like self-respect, because it does feel like you get what you pay for.
Right.
And so if you're selling a cheap product, it makes you feel like you're giving out a cheap product.
Yep.
And for what? Like you said, yeah.
To make a quick buck. And I'm very fortunate that I am to the point in my career that I can kind of dictate within reason what my time is worth.
Yes.
Like, if I get the sense that like somebody's coming across my desk and they're gonna like haggle and nickel and dime me, I get the thing, oh, well, everything's negotiable. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Like, I can just easily say no at that point. Like, this is what my time is worth. And it's another thing too, where so I can mix a song in a third of the time it used to take me.
Okay.
When I was first starting out, it used to take me days to mix a song and banging my head against the wall. If I have all the files like prepped and ready at this point, I can get a song mixed in 4 or 5 hours. So people are always like, why is your price so high for mixing? Like if you're doing that fast. And I was like, you're not taking into account the years
that's what you're paying for
of experience I have that allow me to do it that fast.
Right. That's what you're paying for.
Yeah. So like know what you're worth. If you're starting out, it's tougher because you don't necessarily know what you're worth yet. Like it's a weird line of knowing your own value, but also knowing that the market kind of dictates the value as well.
Yeah.
In the sense that you can set your price for what it is, but if you're getting no work at that price, the market's telling you like, nope, you're not worth that price. So it's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah.
In trying to figure out like what's going to make you satisfied, but what's also going to be tenable for artists and clients to work with. It's a balancing act that is constant trial and error.
So what does like your workflow look like? Because you what you do has so many different elements to it. You do recording, you do mixing, and you even work in 2 different locations. You know, how do you manage all of that? How do you decide how many new clients to take on and manage them all at the same time and, you know, have time to go to home at night and chill? Like, how have you figured that out?
It's still something I'm figuring out.
Yeah.
Because in any creative field or honestly self-employment field, it feels like it's sometimes feast or famine. Like
yes. Yep.
You either have like nothing going on for a month and then you have 6 months where you're like, I haven't had a day off in forever.
Yeah.
So a lot of it for me is being a little bit more delicate with my calendar. Like if I were to get a band in, like if I were to get an email right now saying like, hey, we're a band, we want to do 6 songs, I could probably honestly fit them in late July because I don't really have any sessions going on then. But what I'm not taking into account is the sessions I have for the entire front half of July. I have to edit and mix all that stuff. So I got to figure out, all right, how much time is that stuff going to take?
Yeah.
And that's probably going to push me into August, so I could do August 1. But then that leaves me no free time between when I get all that other stuff mixed and sent out the door to when I start the next one.
Yeah.
So just for like keeping yourself from getting burnt out, I might go, cool, probably we're looking at, you know, and this is assuming that I have stuff in August too, but let's pretend I didn't. I would say, cool, we'll do mid-August. It's more of a question of scheduling yourself time off than it is time to book stuff.
Okay. And so do you spend part of your time in the studio, part of your time in your office mixing? Is that? Yeah,
so the studio, the Halo that I work at in Wyndham, that's where I do all my production and tracking. That's where the bands go. My mix room is just a spot that's closer to home. I can't really do any tracking there. I probably could, but I'd rather not. And that's, you know, it's just me in there. There's nobody else coming and going. I can just be like, lock the door, be left alone.
Yeah. And you do that like certain days of the week or just?
It varies week to week. Yeah, it entirely depends on when my tracking days are. And yeah, it's constantly in flux. Like I never know what day it is. Yeah. Because every day is like kind of the same, but also completely different.
Yeah. So is there any like particular project that you've been like really like proud of or a challenge you've overcome or anything that you could share with us?
I'd say the one that stands out to me the most in recent history, it'd probably have to be the Lamb of God record.
Okay.
And, you know, I was just an engineer on that. I didn't mix it. I didn't produce it. My buddy Josh did, who was kind of my mentor coming up. But what was super cool about it, in addition to the fact that like all the Lamb of God guys are great, I've known them for a long time. There was a studio in Van Nuys, California for years. It was called Sound City. And tons of bands worked there. It was everything from Tom Petty and Fleetwood Mac all the way up to like Nirvana and Rage Against the Machine, like super famous studio that eventually closed down, you know, as the music industry changed. But the main console they had in there that they recorded everything through, Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters purchased it, and he put that in his own studio that he built in, I forget what part of the valley it's in. But that's where we recorded the Lamb of God record. So it still had all the like signatures from like everyone who had signed the desk over the years, like Stevie Nicks. I think Johnny Cash was on there. So like we lost the whole first day of recording, just nerding out.
I'm sure.
Over like how many albums were made coming through that desk that we all came up on. That's one that I always think about.
Yeah. Wow. So what advice would you give to other business owner, creative types who are getting started like you did, especially if they're kind of teaching themselves along the way? What advice would you give to yourself, your past self?
Be very honest with where you're at in your path, your career, and be humble about it. My buddy Darren has an expression that I don't know if he came up with it or if it's from somebody else. But he always says, nobody cares about how much you know until they know how much you care. So like invest in yourself and go all in with the projects you're working on early, and be very honest with yourself and with the artist of like, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm capable of. I'm going to do my best for you. And that's how you build that sort of loyalty and trust with people. Like the whole fake it till you make it thing, like it's kind of true, but it's not tenable for a long period of time unless you're like very seriously putting the work in.
Yeah.
Because there's when I talk to especially younger bands, like late teens, early 20s, something that I think a lot of them don't necessarily know, or at least not aware of, is people who aren't into music production at all. They're just like music fans, like your average music listener. They can listen to a record and in their head articulate whether that's a local band or whether it's a professional band. Now, they may not have the capability to explain why.
Yeah.
Like they can't go through the minutia of like, well, it sounds like there's like home filtering on this. They recorded in a garage, like all this stuff.
Yeah.
But in their head, they can usually tell, like, that sounds like it was recorded in a garage. That sounds like it was done professionally.
Right.
So in their head, once they've chalked you up to like local band, it's hard to break out of that.
Yeah.
And the same thing kind of goes with young engineer producers.
Yeah.
Like bands will hear something and know kind of what caliber it is. A lot of the time, some of them don't. So if you're a young producer, audio engineer trying to be like, oh, I'm the best around, and they hear your work and they go, it doesn't sound like it.
Yeah.
That's a disconnect that's gonna do nothing but breed a little bit of distrust. So just be open with where you're at. It's okay.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It happens all the time where, you know, young guys hit me up. They're like, I want to produce, but like, how do you get clients without having clients? It's like, you got to do stuff for free. Like when I was first starting out, I think even before the basement studio was a thing, I had a mobile rig and I was recording bands in their practice space for like $50 a song.
Yeah.
And like driving like hours and hours and then spending a whole day like unpacking all my stuff and setting it up in their practice spaces. Like, do what you have to do to get someone to take a chance on you, even if you're not going to make a lot of money on it or make no money on it. It starts with building something to show people, like, this is what I'm capable of.
Yeah.
And if you're not looking back on the things that you like you did like even 2-3 years ago and going, oh, I could have beaten that now.
And
like,
learning from it.
Something's wrong.
Yeah.
Like I still listen to stuff I did like 2 to 3 years ago and I was like, I could smoke that now.
Yeah, I
and
get
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That means you're getting better.
Yeah, yep.
So
That's
just
good
be humble and be honest.
Yep, that's good advice. Nice. Well, thank you very much.
Of course.
I feel like this was all like we learned so much. Very, very helpful.
Sorry if I just rambled.
I loved it. I feel like you gave us a lot of good stuff to listen to and to learn about. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, man.
And maybe come back again another day. I feel like
anytime.
we could do this again.
Anytime.
We thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you all again next time.